Listening Library presents The Assassins of Rome by Caroline Lawrence, read for you by Justine Eyre. Scroll 1. One hot morning in the Roman port of Ostia, 2 days after the Ides of September, a dark-eyed boy stared gloomily at 4 presents. The boy and his 3 friends sat on cushions around a low octagonal table in a small triclinium. It was a pleasant room, with cinnabar red walls, a black and white mosaic floor, and a view through columns into a green inner garden. A faint sea breeze rustled the leaves of the fig tree, and they could hear the fountain splashing. "I'm telling you," said the boy, "something bad always happens on my birthday." "Jonathan," sighed his friend Flavia Gemina, "in the past month you survived a volcanic eruption, a coma, and capture by pirates. But now you're safe at home and it's a beautiful day. What could possibly happen? Don't be such a pessimist." "What is sessimis?" asked a dark-skinned girl in a yellow tunic, taking a sip of pomegranate juice. Nubia was Flavia's former slave girl. She'd only been in Italia for a few months. Although Nubia was a quick learner, she was not yet fluent in Latin. Flavia drank some of her own pomegranate juice. Then she held out the ceramic cup. "Nubia," she said, "would you say this cup was half empty or half full?" Nubia studied the ruby-red liquid and said, "Half full." "Then you're an optimist. An optimist always looks on the bright side of things. What do you think, Jonathan? Is it half full or half empty?" Jonathan glanced into Flavia's cup. "Half empty. And it's not even very good pomegranate juice. It's too sour." Flavia grinned at Nubia. "See? Jonathan's a pessimist, someone who always expects the worst." "I'm not a pessimist," said Jonathan. "I'm a realist." Flavia laughed and handed the cup to the youngest of them, a boy in a sea-green tunic, the same color as his eyes. "How about you, Lupus?" she asked. "Would you say the cup is half full or half empty?" "He can't say anything," said Jonathan. "He's got no tongue." "Shh," said Flavia. "Well, Lupus, half full or half empty?" Lupus tipped the contents of the cup down his throat. "Hey!" Flavia protested. But they all laughed when Lupus wrote on his wax tablet, "Completely empty." Lupus grinned but did not look up. He was writing something else on his tablet, using a brass stylus to push back the yellow beeswax and expose the wood beneath. He showed it to Jonathan. "Open presents." All right, said Jonathan. "I'll open yours first." He picked up a grubby linen handkerchief tied with an old piece of twine and weighed it in his hand. "It's heavy and knobbly and—" Jonathan tipped the contents onto the octagonal table. "It's rocks. You gave me rocks for my birthday." "They're not just any rocks," said Flavia. "Lupus searched a long time for those." Lupus nodded vigorously. "They are smooth and round and perfect for your sling," explained Nubia. She held one up. "See? Now open my present." She placed a twist of papyrus into Jonathan's hands. Jonathan undid the papyrus and pulled out a leather strap. "A dog collar?" he said with a frown. "So you can take me for a walk without worrying that I might run off?" "My present is for you and for Tigris," said Nubia. "Maybe more for Tigris." "Thanks, Nubia." Jonathan gave her a wry smile and showed the collar to his puppy Tigris, who was gnawing a lamb bone beneath the table. "And thank you too, Lupus. Rocks and a dog collar. This morning I got an abacus from Miriam and a new cloak from Father. Useful presents all round." He sighed. "Well, I know you'll like my present," said Flavia, handing Jonathan a blue linen bag. "It's not useful at all." A present from Flavia. I wonder what it could be. It's the same size and shape as a scroll, and, surprise, surprise, it is a scroll. The love poetry of Sextus Propertius? Jonathan raised an eyebrow at Flavia. "Isn't that the scroll you told me you wanted?" "Was it?" Flavia grinned sheepishly. "No, but I think you'll really like it, Jonathan. There's a wonderful poem about a beautiful girl with yellow hair, just like you-know-who." Jonathan made a sour face, put down the scroll, and examined the blue bag it had been wrapped in. "I do like this bag, though," he said in a more cheerful tone of voice. "I could use it to keep my nice sling stones in." "Oh, you can't have that," said Flavia, unrolling Jonathan's new scroll. "It's Patter's. I just needed something to wrap it in." Jonathan sighed again. "Who's this one from?" He reached for the last present, a small pouch of yellow silk. Flavia looked up. "That's from you-know-who," she said. "From Pulchra, and from Felix. Pulchra asked me when your birthday was, and they gave it to me before we left." "Now this," said Jonathan, "this is a nice present." In his hand he held a small jar with black glazed figures on apricot-colored clay. "Pulchra told me the vase is from Corinth," said Flavia. "It's called an alabastron. It's very old and fabulously expensive." "Everything in Pulchra's house is fabulously expensive," said Jonathan dryly, but he looked pleased and showed it to the others. "Look, Nubia," said Flavia. "It's a scene from the poem we were studying in lessons this morning. Odysseus and 3 of his companions. They're putting out the eye of the Cyclops with a sharpened stick." "Great Neptune's beard!" exclaimed Nubia. "Why are they doing that?" "Because he's a huge, ugly old giant who's planning to eat them," said Jonathan, as he started to pick the yellow wax away from the cork stopper. Flavia nodded. "Remember how Aristo told us it took Odysseus 10 years to return from Troy? Polyphemus, the Cyclops, was one of the monsters Odysseus faced on his journey home." "I remember," said Nubia. "Odysseus is the hero whose wife is always weaving and unweaving." "That's right," said Flavia. "Everyone thought Odysseus was dead, and all the men wanted to marry Queen Penelope so they could become king, but she was a faithful wife and never gave up hope. She said she would marry one of her suitors as soon as she finished weaving a carpet, but every night she lit torches and undid what she had woven by day. She was sure that Odysseus would return." "Happy birthday, little brother." Jonathan's beautiful sister Miriam came into the dining room and set a platter on the low table. "I've baked your favorite sesame seed and honey cakes, but you can only have a few, otherwise you'll spoil your appetite for later." "Thanks," said Jonathan. He popped a cake into his mouth and offered the plate to the others. "Miriam," said Flavia, taking a bite of her sesame cake, "is it true that something bad always happens on Jonathan's birthday?" Miriam looked thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, see this scar on my arm?" She pushed back the sleeve of her lavender tunic to show them a barely visible mark just above her left elbow. "That's where Jonathan shot me with an arrow on his 8th birthday." "That was an accident," said Jonathan with his mouth full. "But remember how I fell out of the tree at our old house last year and was knocked unconscious, and Father made me stay in bed all afternoon?" Miriam nodded. "And on your birthday the year before, you ran outside to try out your new sling and stepped right on a bee." "It wasn't a bee." Jonathan reached for a 3rd honey cake. "It was a wasp." Miriam gently slapped his hand and picked up the platter. "Jonathan's foot swelled up like a melon, and he couldn't walk for 3 days," she said over her shoulder as she took the cakes out of the room. "Yes." Jonathan sucked the honey from his fingers and reached for the alabastron again. "Something bad always happens on my birthday, and it's usually my own— Oops!" Suddenly, the room was filled with a heady fragrance. The little jar lay in pieces on the black and white mosaic floor. Tigress sniffed at the pool of spreading oil. "Oh, Jonathan," said Nubia, "you dropped the bottle of Pulchra." "And it was filled with scented oil," said Flavia. "Wonderful scented oil." Jonathan was silent. He stared miserably at the broken jar and the golden oil seeping into the spaces between the small black and white chips of marble. "Quickly!" cried Flavia. "Mop it up! Save it!" She pulled Jonathan's linen handkerchief from his belt and pressed it to the glistening oil. Then she used her own. Nubia did likewise. Lupus looked round and grabbed the handkerchief he'd wrapped the stones in. As he got down on his hands and knees to wipe up the last of the oil, Tigress licked his face. "What is that scent?" Flavia closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. "It's not balsam or myrrh or frankincense." "I know I've smelled it before," said Jonathan. "It makes me feel so sad." "How can it make you feel sad?" Flavia said. "It's a wonderful scent. It makes me